Thank you, Matt, first and foremost, for not reading my bio. That was really a great way to start the morning. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. How are you?
Good morning.
Good to see this group. I'm a big fan of the DHS Centers of Excellence. I grew up in academia. My dad was a college professor for almost 40 years. My mom was PhD in higher education administration. So I spent a lot of time at colleges and universities, understand the tremendous intellectual firepower that exists in our nation's higher education institutions, and really think it's a critical thing for DHS and for CBP's mission to be able to harness that thinking and direct it toward really a critical set of priorities. So I have a tremendous set of remarks this morning. I don't want to miss some of the key insights that my staff has here that apply directly to the centers and to your perspectives. So I am going to read a little bit, but I promise not to just read at you all morning. I'd rather have, as Matt noted, a dialogue and get to some Q&A, because I want to be able to answer questions that are pertinent from your perspectives as you're thinking about how to best engage with DHS and CBP and our operational mission, which is pretty broad. So I'll speak to that. In a couple points just at the outset, we've got about 36 of employees of CBP already kind of embedded with and engaging with the centers, providing hands-on and detailed information about our mission and sort of the tactical side. But really, for our partnership to succeed, I think you need to understand our broad vision and scope of what we're trying to accomplish in the coming years, and then make sure that we can have that exchange even more robustly, not only in doing projects, but ideally borrowing some of your best and brightest into the government, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So many of you probably encounter CBP in a lot of different ways in your work and in your daily life. We're certainly present in the media narrative right now, and I can tell you we're certainly a main focus for the White House in terms of the agenda that the Trump administration wants to accomplish. So a couple things that you might not know about CBP. We are the nation's largest law enforcement agency. The most sworn gun-carrying officers and agents of any agency in the country, including NYPD and all the others. And we really are at the center of the agenda here, whether it's border security, counterterrorism, trade and travel facilitation, yes, but also a renewed mission for trade enforcement. And that's a bipartisan direction, both from Congress in the Trade Facilitation Trade Enforcement Act and really heightened in this administration's focus, intellectual property rights protection, addressing dumping and countervailing duty evasion for key products and technologies. And of course, and this is one that's both an anti-competitive issue and a humanitarian issue, addressing forced labor and supply chains. So all different areas of what happens at our border, but mission priorities for Congress and the administration and by extension, the American people. So I wanted to talk a little bit about those areas, but also give you a sense of what I'm trying to accomplish organizationally, because I think it might help provide some insight into areas where your work can be relevant and galvanizing for CBP. Got a chance to talk to a congressional subcommittee. Most of the time you don't say that in government. You don't want a congressional hearing, but this one was actually titled "The Commissioner's Vision for CBP," which was a rare opportunity. And at least at the beginning, I got to lay out some of my focus areas. Bottom line, and this is, it's a lofty vision, but I'd like CBP to become and be recognized as the most effective, most innovative, and most trusted and transparent law enforcement agency in the United States. We already are, I would say, the premier border security and management agency in the world, just given our size, scope, capabilities, and the investment that the U.S. has made in the border. But I would like to take us beyond that in terms of the trust and innovation. And so really that means we're focused on investing organizationally in 4 areas. First and foremost, our human capital. We need to recruit, hire, train, and sustain a world-class law enforcement workforce. That means frontline personnel, of course, but it also means all the disciplines that support them, from the technology side, from the trade analyst side, from the intelligence side. We really have to continuously seek and promote and train talent across the board in our agency, and it's been a real challenge. We got 3.9% unemployment in the country. We have 11 states that have legalized marijuana, with more on the way in the next election cycle. We've got an offering of a GS5 in places that most Americans have never heard of, much less lived in. So that's a tough set of challenges to overcome. So we've got to do better at outlining what an exciting career path that CBP presents, and the opportunities that you have to work in all 50 states, in 40 countries around the world, and to really make an impact on the safety of our communities. So that's first and foremost. But for this audience, even your students, even your academics, there's a lot of ways to contribute at CBP, on the trade side, on the policy side, a lot of exciting work, and we're seeking the best and brightest. The second major area, and this will come out in a number of different ways as we have our conversation this morning, is I'm very focused on deepening and extending our partnerships as an active element of our strategy. And that's, of course, the interagency community. One area that we were working on under the President's direction is the National Vetting Center. Really trying to take an individual risk-based assessment like we've applied at our border for travel for years, but to help make decisions across the immigration benefit environment and to address risk in an intelligent way, but applying all the information that the federal government brings to bear. It's not enough that CBP is doing this analysis on its own, trying to derive information from published intelligence or open source. We really need the entire intelligence community directly engaged with us. We're already, I think, a very good partner for other law enforcement agencies. Some of you might understand the dynamic between investigative agencies that are competing for turf constantly, to be honest. But for CBP, we don't have that challenge because we don't have criminal investigators. We're actually neutral in terms of who owns the end game to an investigation or an arrest. So we're able to partner very effectively, whether it's ICE or HSI, our number one partner in DHS, FBI, DEA, and across the interagency, and including, importantly, foreign law enforcement. So that's something I'd like to extend and make an active and clear part of our strategy. Border management is international by definition. That's why we have a presence in 40 countries. And we see it in three different areas. Operationally, first and foremost, we have the largest undefended land border in the world on our northern border, and we have a critical land border with Mexico, where $11 billion of goods cross that border every day, those two borders. We need to facilitate that traffic. And operationally, that means doing things in coordination with the government of Mexico. A lot of people are asking, how can you do that right now, given there's a Mexican election underway, there's political and diplomatic challenges between our two governments. Actually, the last 16, 17 months have been some of the most productive operational collaboration we've ever had. Maybe the senior levels were distracted and we were able to operationally partner with our Mexican counterparts, but I mean, really exciting things like unified cargo processing. This means instead of a truck stopping 2 to 3 times on its way across our border, once with Mexican Customs, once with Mexican Agriculture, and then at CBP at the port of entry, we're doing that inspection together on the U.S. side with Mexican Customs officials. I just signed an agreement with the Mexican Agriculture Authority, Senacica. So they're embedded with us, and those wait times have gone from a 3-hour process with 3 stops to 30 to 45 minutes total for crossing that border. That's a huge benefit for industry. Hopefully your vegetables and produce next winter will be cheaper at Giant or Whole Foods. It's a tremendous improvement, and that's the kind of thing we need to continue to develop operationally, and to let our team in the field innovate and then support them with the national level agreements behind that. Secondly, the organizations that are threatening us are transnational by nature. The Mexican drug cartels, which we now call TCOs, transnational criminal organizations, are poisoning our communities all over the country. Many of you are tracking the opioid crisis, the fact that these synthetic opioids like fentanyl are 50 times more potent than heroin. They're contributing to record levels of overdoses. That's not a local phenomenon. That is a well-organized transnational effort driven by Mexican cartels and sourced by manufacturers in China. That's what we're facing. So we can't address that kind of challenge alone. We need the diplomacy and the partnership with China Customs, for instance, and with Chinese public health authorities and their version of FDA. But we also need to partner closely with the government of Mexico to address these organizational threats as they approach our border, and then, of course, the money and material that support the cartels coming south from the U.S. And then third, and this is a critical area where our investment is maybe not as well known. People think of Department of State, USAID, but CBP has a robust and continuing capacity building effort to help governments, in the Western Hemisphere for sure, but really globally build capacity to manage their borders and address risk crossing their borders. So this partnership area, which on my list is 2 sentences on my speech, I wanted to talk about a little bit more in depth because it's interagency, it's international, and it's critical. Third, and this is something that many of your centers are engaged in directly, and it's something that we've been partnering on with DHS, S&T, another element of S&T, really robustly the last 2.5 years. We've got to capitalize and accelerate the deployment of emerging technologies into the hands of our officers and agents. The kind of threats we're facing, think of a small UAS, unmanned aerial system, little drones exploiting our border. We have to be able to capitalize on the startup community and bring their ideas into government procurement and government action operationally much quicker than the traditional cycle. So we're doing that. We're partnering with S&T in Silicon Valley and their initiative. We're bringing companies on board in 3 to 4 months from identifying a mission need and doing an offering. That's light speed for government procurement. And we're really excited about some of the potential for situational awareness on the border, for analytics in artificial intelligence, for wearable technology, for both UAS capabilities and counter-UAS capabilities. So it's an exciting area. And really, since the moment that I signed on at CBP, I actually came direct from being a lawyer in Silicon Valley. I've advocated for using technology to enhance our mission. And really, we started at CBP by building on a nascent capability to do risk assessment based on data. We had this capability because of our counter-drug mission in the U.S. Customs Service. And we built around that our National Targeting Center, which is really, I think, one of the highest value, best in class capabilities in all of the Department of Homeland Security. It's a tremendous capability. So from that to what we're pushing the envelope on today, which is applying biometrics in a user-friendly, operational manifestation with facial comparison technology. We need to implement biometric exit. That is a mandate for almost 20 years in legislation. CBP got that baton in 2014, and we looked at it and said, this is not going to work the way U.S. airports are constructed. We don't have departure control the way a European airport or Southeast Asian airport does. How are we going to do this without slowing down the boarding process of aircraft? Our carriers don't make money unless their planes are in the air. So we looked at the technology. We with S&T's help, tested dozens of different approaches out at a facility in Maryland, from fingerprints, from waving fingerprints over, from vein analysis, from iris. And we came up with the fastest and most consistent and verifiable way was with facial. And so we're building a traveler verification service. In fact, we have most of that IT work done on our end, which allows us to pre-stage photographs from travelers. We already know who's coming across that border. Most of them have come in and taken a picture through the traditional U.S. visit system, now run by OBIM at the Department of Homeland Security, or they're U.S. citizens where we have a passport on file. So we're able to quickly compare a photograph, confirm that identity, and allow that traveler to board. We've done it 500,000 times in 8 airports where we're piloting it, 99% match rate, and we've got photographs on 98% of the travelers. I don't know if you've been, hopefully some of you had the opportunity to fly to Aruba from Boston on JetBlue, but their entire boarding process has been automated using the facial comparison. And so travelers are pulling their bags. They don't have to take out a boarding pass. They don't have to find a QR code on their phone. They're simply stopping in front of the camera, getting a green check, and they look back and say, that's it. Usually smiling. Some of the kids, pose for the selfie. And they're boarding the aircraft and heading off to the beach. Lufthansa and British Airways have announced that they're boarding their A380s in half the time with this system at LAX right now. So we see it as a travel facilitation benefit dramatically. We're going to apply it back on entry. So this accelerating technology deployment to the field is absolutely critical. And the next phase for us is for our Border Patrol agents. How do we take the power of what they have on their smartphone, instead of asking them to put it on their dashboard when they pull into the station? How can they take that out on the border with them so they know the results of all the sensor activity that we have, the cameras? We can deploy it right to their device so they know where their partner agents are, so they know where their backup is and help. It's a situational awareness capability that we have today. The technology exists. We have to deploy it to them and get it to them. So we've got to be faster. Because our adversaries are really adaptive. They're incredibly well-funded. They're unceasingly clever is the term that my smarter staff wrote in here. And we've got to be able to keep up with them and deal with that. And then let's talk about trade, because I think the economic analysis is really one of the areas where the centers have helped us in the past, and I'll talk about CREATE in a second. But also where we're continuing to be asked to innovate, both in terms of facilitating that trade and addressing this incredible shift to e-commerce, which is the biggest change in our supply chain since the sea container was created decades ago, but also to identifying patterns of evasion and illicit activity in our supply chains. Not only counter drugs, but IPR enforcement and the flow of goods, raw materials like steel and aluminum. How is that going to try to avoid the tariffs that the administration is putting in place, and how can we detect it early by understanding these economic patterns through academic research? So we look at $4 trillion in trade crossing our border every year. It's about $2.4 trillion in imports, 1.6 or so in exports, and we've got to enforce 500 different trade laws across 49 different departments and agencies. So it's a huge mission. And having the analytics and really the solid economic research to found our operational efforts on is going to be critical to keep up with emerging missions in this area. And then finally, and I offer this, many of you are your stakeholders if you travel internationally to begin with, but you're also stakeholders as our university partners. We really want to transform how our stakeholders interact with CBP, our transparency, our ability to share information, our user friendliness, if you will. That means if you're a global entry member, but by the time my tenure's over, you shouldn't have to put a passport down and take your fingerprints every time you come home. We'd like that facial comparison to let you, on the move, walk right out of the Federal Inspection Service area as long as you don't have anything to declare from a customs perspective. We'd like to make it that simple to interact with us, to renew your applications, to do all these things with technology enablement. But also our stakeholders that are keeping us accountable, whether it's from a law enforcement side on use of force, whether it's how we manage and treat people in our custody as we're apprehending them at the border. We want to be open and transparent and fair in those dealings as well, and to have those results clearly published to the American people, the Congress, and our accountability environment, if you will. So that's my fourth organizational priority. So how can the Centers of Excellence support that vision? And here's where I'm going to read a little bit because I want to make sure I don't miss some of these key elements that are relevant from your perspective. And as Matt noted, I was an early adopter on partnership with the Centers of Excellence. I've worked with Matt since 2005 and really enjoyed participating directly with CREATE as a port director out in the field and talking about how their research could be relevant in terms of applying it, whether it was TSA, whether it was Coast Guard at LA Long Beach, or CBP, in our risk assessment efforts. But really, it was in 2013 when I was Assistant Commissioner of the Office of Field Operations and trying to convince Congress that we actually needed more people to do our job effectively, both to keep up with the tremendous growth in trade and travel, but also to identify risk crossing the border. That spring, the Center for Risk and Economic Analysis of Terrorism Events at USC conducted a study at our request showing a direct correlation in investments in CBP officer staffing and the impact on wait times, and by extension, the impact on the economy. CREATE was the first university-based center of excellence funded by S&T, and really, I'll give you a sense of the results that this produced. It shocked. We knew we mattered. We knew we could have a major economic impact, but this is what CREATE found with a tremendous economic analysis. The study found that adding just one CBP officer at 33 of our key ports of entry would have a tremendous positive impact on the U.S. economy. 61.8 million increase in GDP, 21.2 million in opportunity cost savings, and 1,000 jobs added annually for every single officer put at those 33 key ports. And really, it was that data that helped back up our operational understanding, our information on the growth of trade and travel, that convinced Congress to add 2,000 CBP officers to our authorized appropriations in the next fiscal year. A big deal, and this is 2013, 2014, right? We've just implemented sequestration. There's tremendous budget pressure, but this data helped us explain the impact of our mission on the American people, and it was really a tremendous partnership. It took major involvement on both sides. CREATE had to really learn how the ports of entry operate. They had to really understand the different functions we have and the different job tasks, if you will, that our officers perform. And we had to stay engaged. I had to personally drive my staff to provide the data, to sit with Isaac Maya, who's in the room, and really share that economic information in a way that they could crunch it and come back with this analysis. So it requires that partnership on both sides to be effective. So I really understand firsthand the power of bringing academic research to bear on the policy debate in DC. We had been seeking additional staff for every year for the prior decade, and it wasn't until we were able to combine the operational need, some 3-hour wait times at Miami International Airport, and CREATE's economic analysis to solve that challenge. Of course, we still are working on hiring them. There are so many things that we want to do, and the centers are really, I mean, so many of them have a touch point with our mission, whether it's the Border Trade and Immigration Center of Excellence. We'd like them to help us evaluate our mobile exit self-reporting app. I talked about that requirement to do biometric exit. Well, how do you do that on the land border? It's one thing in the airport environment when people still have to go through a gate to board that aircraft. But in the land border, the vehicle lanes, we have 226 vehicle lanes just on the southwest border, for instance. It's bigger than that on the northern border. How do we make sure that we capture who's leaving without slowing them down and slowing down that cross-border commerce that's so critical to all three North American partners? We're also excited by the DHS Cross-Border Threat Screening and Supply Chain Defense Center of Excellence. I had to read that one. CBP will be a leading agency for this new Center of Excellence focused on cross-border threat screening. Should be awarded later this summer or early fall, I understand. A big investment, $35 million 10-year investment in research requested by CBP. Specifically, this cross-border Threat Center of Excellence will research and develop solutions, protocols, and capabilities to support DHS operations that detect, assess, and respond to known and unknown biological threats and hazards that could threaten the nation's people, agriculture, and economy. So DHS wants to understand alternative approaches to reduce risks posed by new biological threats encountered at borders, ports of entry, and within those portions of the global supply chain that we're responsible for. So, I mean, we see how pandemics are moving across borders. The Ebola challenge from 2 years ago, unfortunately, we may face it again, depending on how the global health response in Congo goes. But this is the same kind of challenge we face with agriculture, pests, and diseases. Agriculture industry is a $4 trillion industry for the United States. CBP has 2,500 agriculture specialists. We cannot let agriculture, pests, and diseases affect that industry. We have to know what's coming at us and refine our approaches to stopping it. Transboundary animal diseases are similarly important. So that's another example of emerging partnership area. A project that is very critical and very timely is also that we're working on with CREATE and experts from actually multiple centers is examining the factors that are influencing migrant flow from the Northern Triangle. You don't have to do much more than turn on the news to understand that there's a flow of migrants to our southwest border from Central America. The factors driving that, whether they are push factors based on violence or economic conditions in Central America, whether they're pull factors driven by the structure of our immigration system and the fact that it's clogged at multiple points in the process. But we need to understand that to formulate good policy and also to target aid. I met with the Deputy Director of USAID yesterday about their Central American programs and how CBP can contribute, especially on the economic prosperity side with good customs governance, with helping them with integrity in their processes, and all of the missing VAT taxes and fees that they're not collecting based on not having the IT to support them. And really understanding where these drivers of that migration are, which specific communities are affected by the violence. USAID has a place-based strategy to address that. They use our information on which zip codes, if you will, in Central America that we're seeing most of the flow coming from to then go back and invest in those areas. We have to have a balanced and multi-pronged strategy as a government to work on the future. We can't have a policy result where Central America loses another generation of energy and youth because it will be continually chasing this challenge. So really understanding those dynamics, how they work, and what policies can help is absolutely essential. And so working with the Centers of Excellence, we're getting insight into that. In fact, there's a consistent perspective that violence is the #1 factor driving the migration. That's not what the initial research is finding, that the surge, especially in unaccompanied children, is not fully explained by changes in crime or poverty in the Central American areas where they're coming from. So we have to understand what is driving it so that we can address it in a holistic and effective way. Another example of how your work is supporting our mission is playing out right here at George Mason. DHS chose George Mason to lead a consortium of U.S. academic institutions and other partners for a new Center of Excellence on Criminal Investigations and Network Analysis. S&T has provided CINA with a $3.85 million grant for its first operating year in a 10-year grant period. And George Mason, naturally being situated in this area, has a tremendous experience working with security and intelligence communities, coupled with strong criminology and sociology programs. So that's a natural fit for understanding networks, criminal networks, and how they operate. CBP has invested heavily in countering criminal networks, and we're excited to partner with CINA in the years ahead. I want to wrap this up and get to Q&A by focusing on an area where you can figure very prominently in our ongoing efforts. It's great to get our macro level needs and hear our vision and mission requirements. It's even better when you work with our folks in the field that are telling you about their operational needs and experiences on the ground. But really, I think, and hopefully Dr. Maya can testify to this, it's actually even better when you work with us side by side. And we know that that's a big ask to come into government. You may be familiar with what is known as the Intergovernmental Personnel Act, or the IPA program. This allows academics to come in and detail in as a federal employee to work on the mission firsthand, and not as a researcher, but as part of our team, maybe doing some research or connecting us to research, but really an integral part of our team on the government side. We think the offer that we are extending is that you'll gain invaluable experience on really how the organizational dynamics of DHS agencies, but also how the mission and operations work firsthand, and take that back to your educational institutions. Our long-term goal is to have the CBP's goal, to have a researcher from every center of excellence supporting us at all times, working side by side with us, because we touch just about every center and their mission. We think this will foster a relationship that is deeper and more effective than we've ever had before. Again, it takes that two-way investment to make the research relevant and effective. We have to understand what your academic prerogatives are, and you need to understand what we're trying to do with that information operationally. So if you or your center are interested, please reach out to Matt, and we'd love to talk to you. And we'd love, if you've got a top student who wants to take this on as a next step in their life, or if you have one of your key researchers at the professor level, that would be tremendous as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity going forward working with CBP, both because our mission in the areas where we're working are tremendously current and relevant, both in terms of government priorities and the political debate, but also in terms of impact on the American people and our communities. But also because we're open to this kind of work. We know the value of it. We want this engagement with the centers. We also actually want you to come in and partner directly with us. So with that, I'll close and take some questions, but I really appreciate everybody's time and attention today.
Any questions for the commissioner? Come on, I set you up. I told you to think of the questions and ask them.
Hello? Anyway, I got a big voice. In fact, there's a couple of questions that probably would take several hours to answer.
Okay. I'm known for my long answers. Fair warning.
But I teach engineering courses at Arizona State University, and I'm responsible for one of the COE's education programs, for a brand new one. And I'm interested in knowing if, what to work for you as an engineering and analytics type of a person. What particular other skills would you recommend I start teaching or pushing or encouraging my students to take? That'd be kind of question one. And the other is, we also have a big, professional development kinds of programs, and what kind of educational opportunities or would you like us to consider developing for your officers in the field, the frontline people?
Great. Those are great questions. First, let me just say that engineers, system engineers, are critical for us in multiple disciplines. You may have heard we're building a wall system on the border. You're familiar? Okay, you've been following. The engineering aspects of that and integrating not only the physical elements, but also the technology. Really, it's not effective if you can't see it. A barrier unmonitored is not a barrier. So really integrating those different disciplines, I think, is one thing that we would offer as critical for your engineering students. It's not, they've got to have a broad perspective in terms of applying it at the border. But this is really something that I'd like to talk more with Matt about. And Alan Burson, our former commissioner, former International Affairs Assistant Secretary, I think did a very good job of thinking about our needs and our unique needs as the largest border security, border management agency in the world for curriculum development. And so, trade. I mentioned Nogales, and that's where Will Brooks, our former DFO, innovated and developed this unified cargo processing effort. But our trade disciplines and what it means to be a trade specialist in the modern era, in the U.S. Customs Service, 1789 on, we had people develop a commodity expertise. And they would sit in New York as a national import specialist or one of our other major ports of entry, and they would know that commodity and very, very focused. That's not the need we have anymore for trade specialists. It's a much more dynamic and interdisciplinary requirement. So I'm going to actually take your question as a task. and come back to Matt with areas of curriculum development that we'd like to talk to our centers about. Because I think that there's some really important work that we could do, and we could offer almost a direct career path, if you will, which is what students want, right? It's 3.9% unemployment out there. And being able to apply your academic discipline in a meaningful way to help others, I think, is a pretty good offering. So I'm going to take that back as a task. Thanks for your dual question. And we could definitely talk for hours about it.
Commissioner, let me just say thanks for the presentation. A superb reflection of the challenges you face. I have a very simple question. As a commissioner, what's perhaps the number one of two things that keep you up at night that you worry that, gosh, I wish someone would solve this?
My answer is probably not going to surprise people. So we're really good at, the CBP is great in a crisis. We're really good at responding to operational challenges and developing strategies to attack them. The two things that keep me up at night, number one is I think front and center in the national dialogue as well, certainly for DHS and other elements of DHS, is cyber. I mean, I just articulated, not only are we already reliant entirely on technology. I happened to be the port director at LAX when the system went out for 17 hours in 2007. But also, we're increasingly reliant on it. I want to increase our ability to use it. So the cyber threats and just the ability to modernize and refresh that technology to keep it active and effective for our agents and officers, I worry about that every night. We developed and delivered the single window. All trade data coming into the U.S. government is coming through CBP now to those 49 departments and agencies, the biggest product of its kind globally, a not well-trumpeted success story, I think, in government IT. And then it went out for 24 hours last August. We've built a tremendous amount of redundancy, some hard conversations with the COO of a major U.S. technology company to get us into a better posture. But that's number one that keeps me up at night. Number two is not being able to find and onboard the people we need to do this critical work. It's a really major challenge, as I highlighted it, as my number one organizational priority. So those are the two. I don't know that the centers can help us with those. I know there's some cyber work going on, of course, but those are the two that keep me up for sure.
Good morning, Commissioner. My name is Gislaine Montes de Oca. I am with Customs and Border Protection, Officer of Trade, International Trade Specialist, actually at the IPR and E-Commerce Center Division. So I have a question for you.
Sure.
We all know how amazing the Trade Facilitation and Enforcement Act is, as well as how many of the other things that we have to work around it. Do you foresee it to be now, since it has been implemented and we're going out there in the field and reinnovating our field personnel to target, that we're going to, or that it has been laying, or it laid a foundation to perhaps have Congress relook at the statutes currently? Because right now, and I used to be an import specialist at the Port of Miami, the main issue that we find, not only in the field services as well as headquarters, is that the most frustrating aspect of going out there and seeing the fruits of our labor is the statutes right now. They're not actually up to speed with the crimes that we see in IPR and e-commerce and everything trade. So do you believe that's actually going to lay the foundation? And if it needs a little bit of help, how can all of these researchers over here assist our agency in actually going forward and putting that out there? Thank you.
Great question. I would offer, and you probably are already engaged in it, but studying the impact of e-commerce on the supply chains, on threats like synthetic drugs, fake products, intellectual property rights protections. I think that's a fertile area for study because, just to give you a sense of how big a deal this is, mail shipments have grown 5 times in 4 years. Last year at this time, we had 1.2 million mail packages a day coming across the border, mostly at JFK's mail facility. We're at 1.7 now from a year ago. That's seismic. This is not stuff going in a big container going to one importer to then be distributed, trusted to trusted partner, where we can see it in an X-ray. It's millions and millions of tiny packages. That has a major impact on those areas. I do think that the statutes will need to evolve again. It took 10 years for the Senate Finance Committee, House Ways and Means to bring forward the Trade Facilitation, Trade Enforcement Act, a landmark piece of legislation that we're still engaged in implementing. 30 different regulations, 100 reports, major system changes. It's a big piece of legislation. But I do think we're going to have to continue to push for a modernized legal regime to support the changes in the global supply chain. You're absolutely right. And really, the work you're doing, we have centers of excellence and expertise. We just added 2 words. Imitation is flattery, right, Matt? And you're doing a tremendous job at our CEEs in responding and really taking that knowledge base across the whole country as opposed to just one port of entry's insights and information. And really, we're going to learn from the centers and their experience as the supply chain evolves and go back to Congress and ask for the changes we need. Thank you for your question. Okay. Yeah, I think I'm encroaching on your panel, and I'd like to stay for the panel if I could. But.
I just have a quick question. In your remarks, you commented on the National Vetting Center. I'm with Office of Field Operations, and we know the value of the COEs and the work that we do. We've partnered with University of Houston to do liveness detection on our mobile app. We're partnering with ASU to do bias assessment on our biometric algorithm. Where do you see the COEs being able to position themselves to help you with the complex problems that you're going to have with the National Vetting Center?
Good question. And by the way, those are 2 very important projects, right? I mean, as you're rolling out new technology that's going to interact with significant numbers of the public, ensuring there are no bias inherent in that technology, ensuring that the privacy aspects are protected, conveying the cyber protections for that personal data, the fact that U.S. citizen data will be destroyed. We're not adding to U.S. citizen biometric capture in this process. All of that is critical. So that kind of work, I appreciate that you're already doing it. On the National Vetting Center side, we've got a couple of challenges. We have to move interagency data into a common engine without privacy impact and while protecting that source information, while then giving good analytical results back to adjudicators who own that mission area. It's a long sentence, but that's you can see the multi-layers of challenge there. There are policy challenges. There are public communication challenges, there are IT challenges, and there's protection of classified information. Part of the gap here in doing good individualized risk assessment, which is what CBP has built the National Targeting Center around, is not always getting the right inputs timely for each mission area. The intel community has a ton of information that's relevant to identifying risk at the border and being able to address it. It's not necessarily harmonized yet. A lot of people said, hey, wasn't that what the Intelligence Reform and Terrorist Prevention Act was for? Wasn't that what the 9/11 Commission was for? Yes, but the notion that even though the U.S. is the most advanced in integrating and analyzing and applying this data, sure, that's true, but it doesn't mean it's comprehensive or fully effective. And that's what the administration has asked us to help lead for DHS and for the interagency to build that next layer. So we need help in moving and protecting that information and in demonstrating that we can segment it and capture it in a way that is consistent with civil rights and civil liberties and our privacy expectations. So those would be two areas of study that we'd like to engage in.
I want to thank the Commissioner for what is a growing partnership between CBP and the universities. I want you all to think about how your faculty and students can come and work with CBP here because you're very much needed. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.